Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for the Sunday Satsang. I will request Panditji at the shrine at Raman Kendra, Delhi to start with the puja. Panditji.
ओम अपवित्रः पवित्रो वा सर्वावस्थाङ्गतोऽपि वा यः स्मरेत् पुण्डरीकाञ्चपः शुचिः ओम केशवाय नमः गोविन्दाय नमो नमः ओम हस्तौ प्रक्षाल्य ओम चंद्रमा मनसो जात शिशो सूर्यो जायत श्रोत्रादयस्य प्राणस्य मुखादग्निर् जायत आगच्छत् भगवन् देवस्थाने स्थिरां यात् पूजां श्री ऋषि रमणाय नमो नमः ओम गणानान्त्वा गणपतिं मुहामहे प्रियाणान्त्वा प्रीपतिं मुहामहे निधीनान्त्वा निधिपतिं मुहामहे वशो अहं जानि गर्भं स्वस्ति साम्राज्यं सर्वेभ्यो देवेभ्यो पूजयामि नमो नमः स्थान देवता ग्राम देवता कुल देवता सर्वेभ्यो देवेभ्यो समस्त देवताभ्यो पूजयामि नमो नमः ओम भज गौरीशं भज मन्मति जलभूतस्तर जलधिस्तरं कें श्रीं शिवहरचरणं अन्योपायो न सत्यं ज्ञेयं शंकर शंकर नित्यं सुपरिवार सहिताय सर्वेभ्यो देवेभ्यो पूजयामि नमो नमः आपदां पहर्तारं दातारं सर्वसंपदां लोकाभिरामं श्रीरामं भूयो भूयो माम्यहं सीता श्रीरामचन्द्राय नमो नमः मनोजवं मारुतुल्यवेगं जितेन्द्रियं बुद्धिमतां वरिष्ठं वातात्मजं वानरमुख्यं श्रीरामदूतं शरणं रुद्रावतारेभ्यो हनुमद्देवताभ्यो पूजयामि नमो नमः देवकी सुतगोविन्दं वासुदेवं जगत्पते देहि मे तनये कृष्ण त्वामहं शरणं आवश्यं प्रतिष्ठामीशं पूजयामि नमो नमः ओम देवताभ्यः पितृभ्यः महायुगेभ्यः च नमः सदाय स्वाहाय नित्यभ्यो नमः सृष्टि साम्राज्यं सर्वेभ्यो देवेभ्यो नमो नमः ओम विश्वानि देव सप्तद्युतानि पराशुति भद्रं तन्नाशु सृष्टि साम्राज्यं सर्वेभ्यो देवेभ्यो नमो नमः ओम ब्रह्मांगाय प्रांतकारी भांसि भूम सुतो उदस्य गुरु शुक्लः राहु केतु सर्वेषां भवतु आवाहस्तामि संप्रतिष्ठामि संपूज्यामि नमो नमः क्षेत्रपाल देवता नमः द्वारपाल देवता नमः तस्दिक्पाल देवताभ्यो नमः 64 योगिनी नमः सर्वेभ्यो देवीभ्यो अस्तामि संप्रतिष्ठामि संपूज्यामि नमो नमः नागेन्द्रहाराय त्रिलोचना भस्मांगरागाय महेश्वराय नित्याशुद्धादिगंबराय तस्मै निकाराय नमो नमः शिवाय नमो नमः पार्वती सपरिवार सहिताय सर्वेभ्यो सप्तऋषि देवता चतुर्वेदाय अस्तामि संप्रतिष्ठामि संपूज्यामि नमो नमः गंगे च जमुने च गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधिं कुरु साम्राज्यं सर्वेभ्यो देवेभ्यो नमो नमः कर्पणां तेरे चरणों में लगता हूँ मैं तेरे काज पालन करने को आ गया तब मैं मुक्त हुआ आज अंत हमें स्थित रहकर समस्त रमन परिवार की बागडोर पकड़े रहना निपट निरंकुश चंचल मन को सावधान करते रहना तू ही है सर्वत्र व्याप्त प्रभु तुझमें है सारा संसार किसी भावना से अंतर भर मिलो सभी से तुम्हें निहार प्रतिपल निधि इंद्रिय समूह से जो कुछ भी आचार करूं हे महर्षि रमन देवता प्रसन्न करने को आप ही का व्यवहार गुरुदेव भगवान की जय अखंड मंडलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरं तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्री गुरुवे नमः ओम भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् तूने हमें उत्पन्न किया पालन कर रहा है तू तुझसे ही पाते प्राण हम दुखियों के कष्ट हरता है तू तेरा महान तेज है छाया हुआ सभी स्थान सृष्टि की वस्तु वस्तु में तू हो रहा है विद्यमान तेरा ही धरते ध्यान हम मांगते तेरी दया ईश्वर हमारी बुद्धि को श्रेष्ठ मार्ग पर चला। ईश्वराय वरदाय सुरप्रियाय लंबोदराय सकलाय जगज्जिताय नागाननाय श्रीविभूषिताय गौरीसुताय गणनाथ महाराज की।
I am going to recite Ramana Stotram. अपार सच्ची सुखवारी राष्ट्रमी मात्र बुद्धं समस्तं बुआयतम तमन्ना गंभीरं चिंता ज्ञानी हृदय चिंत्यामि। ओम आशेन मोशेन जाताय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम गुरुवे नमः। ओम अखंड संकाय नमः। ओम अवसे नमः। ओम कानोदय नमः। ओम जगदिताय नमः। ओम भूमि सत्वदाय नमः। ओम पराशर पुरुषाय नमः। ओम सुंदर तपस्वाय नमः। ओम कमले सुचारिताय नमः। ओम सायम सायवते नमः। ओम सोनाचल मोहिनी मानसाय नमः। ओम शिवसस्ताय नमः। ओम श्रीमद्दान शांत मासते लब्ध विद्याय नमः। ओम मां शक्ति निपातन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ओम परमार्थ विदे नमः। ओम तीव्राय नमः। ओम पितृदानी श्री नमः। ओम इंदु मोन्ना पितृण। ओम पितृदेश सोन व्याप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोन्याय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगी नमः। ओम मोसाय नमः। ओम कुशावृति नमः। ओम श्याम संभ्राय नमः। ओम सुसतसे नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तपे सभी समंगाय नमः। ओम शिलामुज रोचकाय नमः। ओम चंद्रवसित हासी नंदन मंडला मंडलाय नमः। ओम शुद्धवान समासीनाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तत्वज्ञाय नमः। ओम शिवमुद्रे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणित गाय नमः। ओम विरूपांश भुवासाय नमः। ओम विराजा चलाकित नमः। ओम उद्दित नायनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम ऋतक तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ओम अभय पटाय नमः। ओम दक्षा श्रीभाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षा विभुखाय नमः। ओम सौराज्य नमः। ओम हर्षे नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईड्याय नमः। ओम मूल विजय शारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम धृतश्री नमः। ओम आपताय नमः। ओम ऋजुमार्गस्काय नमः। ओम समदस्ये नमः। ओम सत्यदस्ये नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अनंत विक्राय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मधुभाषिणी नमः। ओम ध्यानपाय नमः। ओम श्री सोनल हरि स्कंदस्य निकेतनाय नमः। ओम सदष्टम दृष्टे नमः। ओम सद्वृंद परिताय नमः। ओम दिनेश मुनि चिंता सुधाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सार्थिक संशिषाय नमः। ओम वर्णशम मुतादिताय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम स्वाम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मते नमः। ओम सवानिम स्थानम आराध्याय नमः। ओम सरस्वती नमः। ओम आत्मा रामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम मातृकाय नमः। ओम वित्ताय नमः। ओम विमताय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम पावज्राय नमः। ओम दशरथाय नमः। ओम मुनि शाश्वत मुक्ताय नमः। ओम रचकांत सानिध्याय नमः। ओम सुरधन मोचकाय नमः। ओम दर्शन चंडाशय नमः। ओम संसार वृत्ताय नमः। ओम स्वादि सत्व नमः। और हार्द प्रकाश काय नमः। ओम अविचलित प्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नरसिंह का महातपसे नमः। ओम कमंडलोधराय नमः। ओम शुल्कोज नरसाय नमः। ओम गुहाय नमः। ओम दंडपाणिय नमः। ओम कृपा पूर्णाय नमः। ओम गुरुषाय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवतमाय नमः। ओम अमृताय नमः। ओम सैन्याय नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। हरि ओम। I am going to recite the Updesh Saram. You can recite with me. Katura gaya prapte phalam param kim param karam tajaram iti mohodudo patam karalam palam shashvatam gati rodhakam ishwarapitam nichyapitam chittashodhakam mukti sadhakam kaivam mane karamuttamam udam japa shintanam kama जगदीशदी युक्त सेवनम अष्टमूर्ति पूजनम उच्चमस्तवादुच्च मंदते सिजम जपे ध्यानमुद्रम आजदार्या सोत्समम सरल चिंतनम विरते परम वेद भावना स्वमिस्व भावना विदा पावनीवता भाव शून्य से भाव सृष्टि भावना बला भक्ति उत्तम विस्तरे मने स्वस्थ किया भक्ति योग बोधाश्निष्टम वायुदना लीते मने ज्ञान पक्षी व दोषादम शीतवाय शीत क्यायुत शाक्तोदय शक्ति मूलका लय विनाशने उभय रोधने लय गतम मुने भक्ति नामदम पान बंधना लीन मासम नष्टमानसो कृष्णयोगिने इत्यमस्तिके स्वस्ति विश्ववायतं शीतात्म शीतदर्शनं तत्दर्शनं मानसं तुके माग्निकिते न मानसं मार्गार्जव वृत्तेस्ते वृत्तिमाष्ट विद्रोमनो विजयन अहम्यं कुतो भक्ति चिंतपते हम निज विचारम अहमिनाशिवा यम्यमते स्मृतिधास्यं परम पुरुष दमे पदे अभिक्षमिले अहमिके अपल्य सत्य विग्रह दिए प्राण दीतने नामे सतजम सतवासिका चित्रेत्र सत्यशि चित्रं विषजीव्यो वेशदीर्घ तस्पातो वस्तु केवल देशान्ते स्वातदर्शन विश्वदर्शनम तत्वदर्शन आत्मसंस्थि स्वादर्शन आत्मविद्या आत्मनिष्ठ ज्ञान वर्जिता अज्ञानहीन नमस्ते ज्ञातमग किम स्वरूपमी आत्मदर्शने अव्यापवा अपूर्णचित्तम बंधमुक्ति तम पंचकम देवी वसुदेव पेतकम निजबालकम रमणवादियम हरि ओम ओम श्री रमणाय नमः गणेशाय नमः गोविंदाय नमः हरि ओम
Rajesh ji,
Yes, sir.
uh,
Actually completed, sir.
Raghav ji, we will now commence. So let me just introduce. A warm welcome to all the devotees for another Sunday Satsang at Raman Kendra Delhi. In continuation of our satsangs for the 42 select verses from Bhagavad Gita, we will again go into the further two verses which Raghavji had advised us. Just a brief background about Raghavji, though he has been with us since August, most of us already know him, but I see some new people joining on YouTube, so hence I'm introducing him again. Raghav Kumarji is a devotee of Bhagavan Sri Raman Maharishi with a background of Vedanta study under various acharyas of Rishikesh and Uttarkashi over several years. After completing a degree in technology in 1993 and a few years of research in electronics, he was drawn to the exclusive pursuit of the path of self-enquiry. He was blessed to be closely associated with the Ramakrishna mission, Arshavidya tradition, and the Adi Shankar Brahma Vidyapeeth Uttarkashi. Since 2001, he divides his time between Uttarkashi and Tiruvannamalai. Raghavji occasionally shares what he has learned from the acharyas with fellow devotees. Raghavji, now may I please request you to uh, to to start the session. You are visible now, Raghavji.
Yes, namaste. Am I audible?
Yes, please, you are.
Yeah, okay. Namaste and a warm welcome. We will chant the Shanti mantras and begin today's sharing on the Gita Saraha, Bhagavan's selected 42 verses on the Bhagavad Gita.
दरवाजा बंद कर दो बोलो।
सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः वन्दे श्रीरमणश्रेः आचार्यस्य पदाब्जं यो मे दर्शयदीशं भान्तमतीत्य पार्थसारथिरूपेण श्रावयित्वा शुभाङ्गिरं पार्थस्यार्तिहरो देवः कृपामूर्तिः स पातु नः. So we were looking at some of the shlokas of Bhagavan's selected verses. Today the net connection is a little slow. If there is any interrupt, please do let me know. I shall make some alterations.
Sure.
So we were looking at one verse from the Gita which Bhagavan has selected, which is one of the few verses where the word Shastra is mentioned. And given that Bhagavan's method is such a direct path, and there is always a focus on directly plunging into Atma Vichara, it's interesting that Bhagavan has nevertheless included this verse in his selected verses. It was the one which we saw the last time. Yash Shastra Vidimutsrujya Vartate Kamakarataha Nasasiddhimavapnoti Nasukham na param gatim. So the verse there was saying that one who takes to whatever he wants to do, born of his own ragadveshas, is not going to get any happiness either here or the hereafter. And we had also seen that Bhagavan was very firmly part of the Advaita Sampradaya, which is careful not to jump the levels. And I say this because in Advaita, one of the very common pitfalls is to bring in the Paramartha Tattvam, the Advaita Brahma Tattvam, into Vyavahara, into empirical reality. And the focus on Shastra is to take care that we do not get into any confusion like that. Vartate Kamakarataha. Anyone can do anything in the name of Advaita. So Bhagavan is reminding us here that there is a certain pattern, a certain structure here, even though Advaita is beyond all labels and all names and forms and conventions. Nevertheless, only if we are aligned with Dharma, we are aligned with the instructions of the Acharyas, then alone we can transcend and see through all the unreality of these conventions. So the step we are asked to take is first have alignment in our conduct with Dharma, what is right. And only then, after there is a spontaneous alignment with Dharma, when one's mind is, so to speak, in harmony with the cosmic order, that mature mind, or pure mind as it's sometimes called, is then ready to make that leap, that quantum leap into Advaita Jnana. So on the other hand, the earlier shloka was saying, Shastra Vidhi Mutsrujya, one who gives away or renounces the injunctions of the Shastra. For example, Shastra may say that one has to practice a certain type of conduct in Vyavahara or in empirical life. So a person may conveniently step aside all those conventions. So all of that can give rise to some confusions. A person will not properly assimilate and live the life of Advaita. So that was the key point in that stotra or shloka rather. And the word Shastra too, sometimes it has this connotation of something textual, something merely in the form of information. That very word traditionally had a very profound and a very important connotation. That word meant Shasti Trayate cha iti Shastraha. So it instructs us. It is something that reveals the truth to us. And Trayate, so it helps us transcend our limitations. So it's not just a belief system here we are talking about, but something that reveals certain truths to us. If we think about it, we do not actually verify many of these truths we live by and we take for granted. Even in, let us say, the technological devices we use, we do not really know the underlying technology. We have never actually seen an atom or a molecule. And yet we trust the scientific system, the whole body of science, so many great scientists, one achievement building on another. and we are trusting their wisdom and getting the fruits of it. So the Acharyas explain to us that why Shastra is so much emphasized is because this Shastra is also a universal tradition of Atindriya Vishayas. If you think about it, if I had a choice of, let us say, going to a doctor, and I need to go to a doctor because I have some ailment, which doctor would I choose? Would I choose to go to someone who says he has, no connection with any Shastra or any other tradition? He has never studied under any other guru. He's just made it all and figured it out himself. Would we go to someone like that? Or someone who has good pedigree, as it were, who has alignment with the larger tradition of medical science? For sure, we will trust our life with only a doctor who has proper credentials. Even so here, only the one who is aligned with the Advaita tradition is a sound guru, which is why Bhagavan always emphasized that his guru was Arunachala. And in contrast, we might find, people who mistakenly, innocently might say, I have figured it all myself. I do not need any help from any Shastra. That is an innocent, but also a significant mistake. So, yash Shastra vidimutsrujya vartate kamakarataha nasa satyam avapnoti. He will not attain to the goal, says this shloka. So to come back to what I was saying, I would like to devote just a few minutes because it is so important in today's context to understand that the Shastra tradition is not, like I said, just a belief system foisted on us. It is instead the distilled wisdom of thousands of jnanis, thousands of rishis over so many millennia. And India safeguarded its tradition. It's not peculiarly even an Indian tradition, really, if you think about it, because it deals with Atindriya Vishayas, or truths which are not sensible as objects. For example, the law of karma, or the fact that this consciousness which is available in an individual is not created or destroyed, what is known as the law of reincarnation. So the fact that this locus of individual consciousness is neither created nor destroyed is a very profound truth which is coming to us through this tradition. And there was a consensus. This tradition evolved, so to speak, by interpreting the Vedic mantras. It's not just a single man show. It's not just somebody claiming that he has discovered it all himself. There were thousands of jnanis who, in some sense, converged upon a consensus, which is why if anyone sort of rubs against the Shastra tradition, they are liable to go wrong. All the great acharyas in modern times, Sh Ramakrishna and Bhagavan, they are totally aligned with this Shastra tradition, and which is very good to bear in mind that. So after thus emphasizing how this tradition of Shastra guides us both in our conduct and our path towards Atmavichara, the next verse here takes to a slightly different topic. So if you remember the coherent flow in the shlokas that Bhagavan has chosen for us, I will just recapitulate it for you. The 700 shlokas of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan first chose the context that Krishna is adopting the role of the Guru in response to the plea of Arjuna, who was very open, very vulnerable, and he was filled with a certain sorrow which he sought a permanent solution for. So that kind of an attitude is what is very important. That sets the context for the Guru to really open the floodgates of grace, as it were, because then the Shishya, the student, will receive it properly. And after that, Bhagavan chose verses unfolding the Atma Tattva. So verses which reveal consciousness as not in the stream of time, Nityaha, not in any point in space, Sarvagataha. And I pointed out how the word Nityaha is not just a descriptive word for consciousness, saying that consciousness is just something which lasts a long time within time. Rather, all time is within consciousness. Bhagavan chose this particular idea even in the Saddarshanam, to say that all that is past is also experienced only as a memory in the present moment. And all that you think as future is but a thought in the present moment. And when you look at the present moment itself, it is not even a 1 second duration entity. It doesn't have any duration at all. The present moment is timeless awareness. So this kind of idea, which makes the mind fall back into consciousness without any concepts, was what was unfolded in several shlokas. Again, sarvagataha, that consciousness is not within any point in space. When you think of any object, what is the distance between that object and consciousness? There is no distance. That object is in consciousness, it arose in consciousness, and it moves away to be replaced by another object. So if we ask the question, what is the distance between any object, even a distant galaxy? What is the distance between that galaxy and consciousness? The answer is 0. There is no distance. Consciousness is everywhere. All objects are in consciousness, as it were. So the sarvagataha idea reveals consciousness as not in space. In this manner, it was also shown how consciousness is never born. There's never a moment it didn't exist. If you think about how consciousness, can it ever even cease to exist? If we were to form a concept, you would still have to be there to form that concept. You would have to imagine all others around, there is a world around, people are hanging around, and you are not there. So then you're again forming this concept. That means that conscious entity has to be there. So this idea of consciousness ceasing to exist is impossible. It's a logical impossibility. In this manner, it was shown how consciousness is not subject to the bhava vikaras, the different changes that every other entity undergoes. Consciousness doesn't undergo any such bhava vikaras or transformations such as birth, aging, growth, death, and so on. 6 of them were there, if you remember. So all this was an unfoldment of Atma Tattvam. These words are designed to put the mind into self-inquiry. They're not adding to your concepts. Instead, they are dismantling your concepts. So I have so many ideas, notions. What am I? What I am? I am this, or I am that, or I am in time, I am in space, and so on. So these words of the Gita Acharya Krishna, chosen by our Bhagavan, are intended to dismantle that structure of concepts which binds us and makes us feel small and limited. So the more we are able to allow these words to sink in, the more the mind gently resolves back into its source, the Atma Tattvam. So these shlokas up to the 11th, if I remember, the 11th, are more dealing with the Atma Tattvam. After that, Bhagavan chose shlokas which tell us what is the gati, or the state of one who has assimilated this knowledge. And it was shown by Bhagavan that such a person does not have a further existence or a further birth again. So we normally take this for granted, that the rebirth cycle stops when a person gets or arrives at the knowledge of the self. Why is that so? It might seem a little obvious, or we take it for granted, but why is it that there's a connection between birth and rebirth and the idea of self-knowledge? So there's a story told that at the time of the beginning of creation, all the jivas, all the different entities, beings, were in a kind of semi-sleep state. They had all these unfulfilled desires, unfulfilled, longings. And they, as it were, prayed to that cosmic being who was alone there as their father, as it were, asking him to create this universe for us, to create this world of objects so that we might express and enjoy our world of experiences. So it is we, due to our ajnana or avidya, which has actually been instrumental in this creation. So a commonly asked question, why did God create the world? Well, the answer is that it is our own avidya which has, if at all, made him create this world. We have, as it were, demanded, so to speak, a creation for learning, for going through our karmas and samskaras. Conversely, if we are able to see through the bluff that I am not just this limited being seeking these limited objects before me, then the cycle of causation, cycle of rebirth comes to an end. There is no more a motivation, no more a force which will bring about another embodiment. Because when I am all that exists, where do I go? Where do I live? So the notion of samsara goes away, that is destroyed. When avidya is gone, samsara also is gone. So this word or this knowledge is called samyak darshanam. In the Shankara's word for this knowledge is called samyak darshanam. Samyak means right. Darshanam means vision or right way of seeing. So embodying this shloka, Bhagavan has selected one verse here, which we will look at in today's class. Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram vinashyat savinashyantam yah pashyati sapashyati. Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram vinashyat savinashyantam yah pashyati sapashyati. So the basic meaning of this shloka is that the one who sees that samam is that one principle which is unchanging in all the beings. If he is able to see that unchanging principle called Parameshwara in all the living beings, that person who sees that indestructible principle amongst all these destructible entities, all these living beings, that person alone sees rightly. Yaf pashyati, sa eva pashyati. He alone sees, says this shloka. Now here one might ask a question. All of us do see different beings. Where is the wrong seeing at all? Is there a wrong seeing? Why or where does it happen? So there is an interesting conversation here, which Bhagavan has in, and it is recorded for us, which I will share for you a little later. But the idea here is that the word samam, or that one principle which is present in all living beings, is that same Brahma Tattvam or consciousness, which is no doubt present with different upadhis or different limiting adjuncts as they are called, which means that whenever I see any name and form, if I shift my attention to that which is superimposed, to that upon which these names and forms are superimposed, then I'm able to see that which is unchanging in that. If I were to tell you that all this matter is made up of just atoms and molecules, and I give you a certain model, yes, it does seem convincing enough. We might go along with that. Even so, for many of us, it's easy enough to see that there is the same principle of consciousness in all living beings, as long as those living beings are not connected to us really. So I might find it easier to actually appreciate that Parameshwara, that divine consciousness underlying all that exists, as long as those beings are somewhere else, they are not really connected to me. It's easier to do that there. So if there are 7 billion people, let's say, just look at people alone for now. If there are 7 billion human beings, it's easy for me to say God, quote unquote, God dwells in all of these living beings, 6,999,000,000 and maybe 99,595 or whatever. Whereas just 5 or 10 of them who are very close to me, there is a certain subjectivity. It's not easy for me to see that God dwells in them. Perhaps they are ones with whom I have some baggage. I have some transaction which is creating some distress for me. Or I may have some attachment, my own family, my own near and dear. So it's much more difficult to just impersonally say that God dwells in these living beings. Whereas it's much easier to see when I, let's say, admire nature, for example. Yes, God is present everywhere. It's so beautiful. But then if you look at, let's say, a very crowded street in a city, where God dwells there as well. But we find it more difficult to see that there. Why? Because the second one, the image of a crowded city or traffic in a city, it evokes the past in us. It evokes certain likes and dislikes in us. It comes reminding us of our own smallness. You know, if a villager were to come to a city, he probably, let's say for the first time he comes to a city, he might even respond to the city perhaps a little more openly, with more openness, because he has not yet really been roughed up, so to speak, by city life. On the other hand, we as city dwellers might find it much more easier to appreciate divinity in the names and forms of the countryside or in Mother Nature. So the idea here is the one who can see this samam Brahma. Samam means that same principle of consciousness which is everywhere. If we are able to see that in everything that exists, then we have made it. That vision is right. So the challenge for us lies not so much in the vast majority of living beings or names and forms, but just the small group which we call the world. You know, when we say that we have to love everyone in the world, or we say that all that exists in this world is consciousness, we are only really referring to just 5 or 10 significant few in our life. It may be employer, employee, mother, father, children. So these are the few people where all our baggage really is there. So that's where the sama darshanam is so difficult. So that's where we do our sadhana. In those transactions, we bring in the sama darshanam. What does it mean to bring in sama darshanam in our conduct? It means that whenever there is any distressing emotion which arises in our daily life, with respect to the significant few in our life, we try to bring in the Guru Upadesha. The Guru has said that these people, these near and dear, or those with whom I don't, let us say, see eye to eye, say they have some baggage, they are showing a certain wrong actions in their behavior. All of them too, I recognize the same Ishvara, that there is a cosmic order which has made them what they are, which has made them the way they are. And then I do what I have to do. So the last sentence is very important. I still do what I have to do. I don't become passive there. If you think about it, Krishna is giving this instruction to Arjuna, saying that see the same Samatattvam, that the Lord Parameshwara dwells in everyone, including in this particular case, Duryodhana and Bhishma and all of these people who are arrayed to fight Arjuna. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, see the same Parameshwara even in Duryodhana and Bhishma, and then fight. So that doesn't alter the fact that he has to do what he has to do. But there is no dvesha, there is no hatred, there's no baggage. Doesn't leave any impress on the mind. If a person does what he has to do, be it even an unpleasant duty or an unpleasant task, provided he does that without any personal agenda, without any dvesha. So this Samadarshanam is the one thing which will make a man free to do rightly. Okay, so this shloka is highlighting that Samam Sarveshu Bhuteshu, the one who sees that Samam Brahma, that the same Brahma Tattvam has made everything the way it is. I didn't create anything. I did not create what world I see in front of me. Therefore, that universal intelligence has made things the way they are. And all these names and forms come and go. What doesn't change? That unborn consciousness doesn't change. So this underlying, understanding is there even in my conduct. Bhagavan used to give almost like a tip, as it were. He would say that if you practice Atma Vichara for even an hour or more in the morning or every day, that current of self-awareness, of alertness will stay with you throughout the day. He was very encouraging towards Grihasthas and others who have a lot of duties. He would say, nil desperandum. If you practice Atma Vichara, have conviction in the words of the Guru, that current of awareness will be maintained throughout your life, throughout your conduct in your day-to-day transactions. And how do you know you're maintaining that awareness? Check if the distressing emotions, if any, produced by the situations are just very marginal. They just come and go. They're just thoughts, then it's okay. But if your experiences and emotions in a given day are leaving an impress, they are sort of very difficult to unwind out of, then for sure there is some more homework to be done. We can just give our attention to those emotions and people or situations where our subjectivity is coming up, because the Samadarshanam is not happening. Samam Sarveshu Bhuteshu, that is not possible for us there. So that's where our sadhana lies. Not so much in, let us say, admiring nature or seeing God in a very divine, sattvic being. That's also excellent. That's a good starting point. At the same time, our homework, sadhana, lies where we are, as it were, faltering. So, vinashyat savinashyantam yah pashyati. Here, our Shankara Bhagavad Pada makes an interesting point. He says, you see, he says that the whole origin of this samsara for you is because of wrong vision, wrong thinking. If you remember the first shloka chosen by Bhagavan, as spoken by Krishna, it was idam shariram kaunteya kshetramitya vidiyate etad yoveti tam prahuhu kshetrajna iti tadvidaha. Then kshetrajnam chapimam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. So that was the starting, the preamble. And that connection is brought to this particular shloka, that the one who is able to discern, to disambiguate this kshetra, kshetrajna confusion, that is alone what is called right seeing, and that person alone is the jnani. So the kshetra, kshetrajna samyoga, the confusion, mutual confusion between the two, makes us see wrongly. So whenever I see, let us say, someone as my family, my son, and I lose my objectivity. Okay, I could just use the word my family, my son. Okay, that's fine as a matter of semantics. But if there is a deeper emotional investment, which makes me very deeply affected when they are affected, there is kshetra, kshetrajna, samyoga. That samyoga is the avidya here. That's the consequence of avidya. So that samyak darshanam, what will it do? It will help us separate kshetrajna from kshetra. To see that I, the seer, the kshetrajna, am not involved with kshetra. Kshetrajna and kshetra are seen as totally vilakshanaha, separate in their characteristics. If you remember, what was the kshetrajna lakshana? Nashyatvam. It is nashvara. It is always subject to change and destruction. Conversely, kshetrajna is an imperishable. The kshetra is perishable and kshetrajna imperishable. So that is why here vinashyatsu avinashyantam. This shloka wraps up that idea, saying vinashyatsu, in all that is changing and destructible, you should be able to see that which is indestructible. And like I said, the main challenge there is where we have some emotional investment. That's where we need to pay extra attention. As students of Atma Vichara, remember, you're doing Atma Vichara not only when you are keeping your eyes closed, even when you deal with these challenging situations, which in some sense expose our vulnerability, which bring out the avidya, so to speak, that's where our sadhana is very meaningful. So we don't think of these situations which disturb us as interruptions to our sadhana. Rather, facing that itself is the sadhana. Facing those situations which I don't have a choice whether to face or not, especially those situations where my free will is not there. They're just coming here, they're in front of me. And facing those situations in the spirit of Bhagavan's Upadesha, that is also part of Atma Vichara. That's where the progress, the better assimilation of this vision happens. So the next shloka is again a reiteration of this, that one who sees this samadarshanam, what is his characteristic, or what kind of samadarshanam? The seeing that oneness, seeing the Lord in all these perishable entities. What is the nature of that seeing rightly is told in this next shloka. We will chant that. Bhaktya mam abhijanati bhaktya tvananyaya shakyaha ahamevam vidhorjuna jnatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha parantapa bhaktya tvananyaya shakyaha ahamevam vidhorjuna jnatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha parantapa. So the earlier shloka was in the 13th chapter, which deals with kshetra and kshetrajna. And Bhagavan has connected this with another shloka from the 11th chapter, the 54th shloka of the 11th chapter, which is the Vibhuti Yoga, where the different glories of the Lord are described. And in the 11th chapter, this verse actually says towards the end of the 11th chapter, that one who only has this Ananya Bhakti, the bhakti where one sees the Lord everywhere, one sees that principle of awareness everywhere, him alone, he alone can see this Vishwarupa Darshanam. So that's an interesting verse. Krishna, after revealing his Vishwarupa to Arjuna, wraps up that topic or that teaching saying, "O Arjuna, only the one who has this Ananya Bhakti will be able to see this form which you have just seen." Bhagavan there says something very interesting. He says that actually what we call Vishwarupa Darshanam need not exactly be something very spectacular or frightening, because that was in keeping with what Arjuna needed to see. And the word Vishwarupa Darshanam is more generally for all of us, really. Vishwa means all that exists. Rupa means form. Darshana means to see. So you see that that same Lord has become all that exists. So Vishwarupa Darshanam for you and me implies that I am able to see that one universal intelligence pervades all that exists, and I do not have any hatred or any kind of subjectivity in this Srishti. I am able to see objectively this Srishti is pervaded by just that principle of awareness that is not separate from me. So that is the Vishwarupa Darshanam, Bhagavan says. He actually is bringing it to Jnanam itself. Bhagavan always directs our attention to Jnanam rather than some special, sound and light effects or some special visions. So he always discourages those kinds of things that come and go. On the other hand, the way Bhagavan explains Vishwarupa Darshanam, it doesn't come and go. It's something that you assimilate, you embody by and by. So it's very beautiful. I will share with you that small talk. It's an excerpt from a talk where Bhagavan explains what is this Vishwarupa Darshanam, which is talked of in this context of the shloka. Bhaktya tvananyaya labhyaha aham evam vidho Arjuna. So there Krishna is saying only by Ananya Bhakti you can see this form. What is that form? So Bhagavan tells us there. He says when Bhagavan was asked what was Vishwarupa, the latter's reply was, it is to see the world as the self or God. So when you see the world, you don't see it as a separate world apart from you. To see the world as the self or God is the Vishwarupa Darshanam. And in the Bhagavad Gita, God is said to be various things and beings and also the whole universe. How to realize it or see if this is so? Can one really see oneself? Though it is not seen as an object, that means can the self ever be denied? Bhagavan is asking that. So the self alone is seen as all that exists. That is the Vishwarupa Darshanam in Bhagavan's vision or teaching. And Bhagavan goes on to add, see this word Bhaktya Tvananyaya Labhyaha, here through Bhakti alone is this Vishwarupa Darshanam attained. Bhagavan says something very meaningful. He says it's not different from Jnana. Many of us have this maybe taken for granted notion that Bhakti and Jnana are different. In Bhakti there is emotion. And Jnana, not so much emotion, it's more something intellectual. But really in the tradition which Bhagavan is totally highlighting, there is no difference at all between Bhakti and Jnana. The difference is melded completely and very explicitly it is taught. And I will talk about a little bit of that a little later. So Bhagavan says that devotion itself is Jnana. The mind losing itself in Shiva's feet is devotion when the ignorance is lost. So when the ignorance is lost, automatically whatever you see is appreciated as Shiva. You don't see anything separate from Shiva. So that devotion and Jnana therefore are not two compartments. The same devotion initially is called Jnana when it becomes complete. The Parakashta, the culmination, so to speak, of Bhakti is Jnana. That is the vision of the Gita. So there are other ways you can say Jnana gives rise to Bhakti and so on. But in the Gita vision, Bhakti is divided as we saw in certain other contexts into 4 types. That a Bhakti where you call on the Lord when you are in distress is Artha Bhakti. So when I am in distress, I think of the divine, I am prayerful, I am humble, vulnerable, which is very good. It's an excellent start and not something to look down upon. So they are Sukritino Arjuna, says Krishna. They are also very blessed. And then you have the Bhakta who not only thinks upon the Lord or calls upon the Lord when he is in distress, he also calls upon the Lord when he seeks something positive. So he's relatively okay and happy kind of with his life, and yet he has some desires to fulfill. He does his efforts, but he wants that extra grace, which will make things happen as per his, desires. So that is the Artharthi Bhakti, the one who seeks a certain something in his empirical life. Again, nothing to look down upon. We know the well-known case of Manavasi Ramaswamy Iyer, who prayed earnestly to Bhagavan for relief from a health problem. That was the Artha Bhakti. And there were others who prayed to Bhagavan for so many regular desires which had dealt with the world. Bhagavan never condemned or looked down upon them, because in and through them, he could quickly guide them to Atma Vichara. So it's so beautiful to see how the Guru never, looks down on people who are at different levels in their journey. All too often, we might feel, oh, people are asking Bhagavan for some worldly objects, or just they are, fair weather devotees, as it were. Look, they call on Bhagavan when they are in distress, and later they're no longer really keen on anything adhyaptika. But Bhagavan and Krishna are validating that kind of bhakti, and they are very, very essential stepping stones to come to Bhagavan in the total way as Jignasus and finally as Jnanis. So the word bhakti therefore has these four delineations. The third is the Jignasu Bhakti, where you seek to understand Bhagavan, knowing that in understanding Bhagavan, I discover him in my heart. So you no longer want to really pray to Bhagavan as someone separate from you. Instead, you want to become one with the very being of Bhagavan. So that is the shloka expressing that in various ways. We'll be seeing a few of the details of that too. So this third type of bhakti is Jignasu Bhakti. And fourth is what is known as the Jnani Bhakti. The Jnani Bhakti there is not the Jivan Mukta like Bhagavan. He is beyond even these four stages. So this is an interesting thing. I thought I'll just give this nuance here. The four stages of bhakti referred to in the Bhagavad Gita are still at the level of advanced sadhakas, even the fourth stage. Okay, so they are ones who have that inner breakthrough. Okay, if you want to use the terminology used by Bhagavan, aham sphurana, that is available to these jnani bhaktas. So they have a certain insight into the jnana itself, and yet they are still not jivan muktas. So for such people, Krishna Bhagavan says, through abiding is as the self, and in the self they attain to me. So there is still a certain last stage, if you like, of progression, of assimilating that knowledge. So where your alambana or your whole focus, your attention is on this aham sphurana, and all the other pursuits become meaningless, and everything revolves around just staying as the self, abiding as the self, as Bhagavan says. These Jnani Bhaktas are called Jnanis by way of courtesy, because they have an insight into how the mind resolves as the self. Okay, so it's no longer just intellectual for them. Something more has been discovered by them thanks to the grace of the Guru. And yet there is still a certain pull of the old samskaras, pull of the contrary notions, the viparita bhavanas. So for such bhaktas in the fourth category, Bhagavan says, Bhaktyamam abhijanati, elsewhere he says, through that bhakti, they will know me. That verse is also going to come later. The reason why I highlighted these four types of bhaktas is to say that this distinction between bhakti and jnana is more semantic. And the vision is very clear that four types of bhaktas are there. The third and fourth type are into the jnana marga. So what does this shloka say now? So bhaktya tvananyaya labhyaha. So the one who has this jignasu or jnani's bhakti alone will see me as the Vishwarupa everywhere. Now you can see how Bhagavan's Atma Vichara fits in with this shloka here. So when you practice Atma Vichara, what happens? The mind resolves as the self. Through negating all the thoughts and outgoing thoughts, the mind goes back to its source, which is the Atma, Atma Samstam Manaha, as Krishna says later on. So by doing that, which is what is referred to as Aham Sphurana, this happens when the mind resolves, at least temporarily. And then when it becomes spontaneous, we call it Sahaja. Then after that, even this Aham Sphurana is no longer required to be cultivated. It just is spontaneous all the time. That aham, it will spontaneously be there. There is no more separate mind which is having any avidya in it. Okay, that is the Jivan Mukti. So to come back to what we are saying here, Bhaktya Tvananyaya Labhyaha, the one who has this bhakti, in other words, in this particular case, this vritti really, this vritti itself is referred to as bhakti, one who has this highest vritti born of the grace of the Guru. Bhaktya Tvananyaya Labhyaha Aham Evam Vidho Arjuna. So through that vritti, you are able to appreciate God as all that exists. After that, even the vritti resolves. Like even a stick used to kindle a fire, after that is offered into the very fire, as the well-known example goes. So here, that is also known as the bhakti. The word bhakti also refers in its highest sense, not to an emotion, not to a feeling, not to even doing some karma, but to that very atmani avasthanam, abiding in the self. That itself is also a very subtle vritti called the Ahamsphurana. In Vedanta, this is also equated with the higher form of Nitithyasanam. There was in this context a question which I will refer to. The question was, first of all, is Ahamsphurana a way of returning to the source or Brahman? So we could say that. Just remember that the word vritti is not really, you can better translate it as a modification of the mind rather than a state. You could say it's a state in a way, but the correct word there would be a vritti is a modification of the mind. Whenever you see any object or you understand something or you hear something, the mind modifies itself into the shape, so to speak, of the object. There is no difference between the shape the mind takes and the object. And what happens in a very mysterious way when this Aham Sphurana takes place is that the mind no longer has the distinction of knower and known. So at the time of Aham Sphurana, there is only Aham. There is no Aham Jnata, I am the knower, and Etad Jneyam, this is the known object. That distinction is not there. That is why this vritti of Aham Sphurana is traditionally also called Akhandakara vritti, where there are no khanda, means break. There is no break in the vritti as knower and known. This distinction is like a break, a division in the vritti. All other vrittis you experience will have this break. Either knower, an object which is the known. Whereas in the Akhandakara vritti, where I just abide in myself, the mind resolves. There is no more division as knower and known. So the same Akhandakara vritti, Bhagavan is teaching us in very simple words, saying it is Aham Sphurana. The I flashes forth when the mind dissolves into its source. The mind is the dividing entity, right? So the mind is active implies generally there is some division, nor known. But the mind resolves, it's not that the mind ceases to exist. Okay, remember, anything that is now will continue to exist, but it resolves into its source. An example could be given such as you have, let's say, a clay pot. The clay pot, if it resolves as clay, okay, in your understanding, that doesn't mean whatever was earlier has totally ceased to exist. Instead, it has just gone back into its source, from which it came due to the force of avidya and samskara. So here, therefore, the Brahmakara vritti / Aham Sphurana is when the known division is temporarily resolved. And so that becomes the basis for the sadhana. Okay, in the higher bhakti, that becomes the very focus of one's Atma Vichara sadhana. And in doing that sadhana or in staying with that sadhana, even the word doing is by way of courtesy, because every other thing is a doing. I chant is a doing. In Atma Vichara, there is no doing. That is a very subtle point there. But in staying with that Aham Sphurana vritti, the Viparita Bhavanas, all the opposing tendencies will over a period of time come up, challenge us and go away. They will come up, meaning they will surface, they will create some distress or they will try to shake us up. And we might even think it's coming from the external environment, but you stay rooted in the teaching of Bhagavan and that will leave us. The Viparita Bhavana, the contrary notion born of the Vasanas, comes up and then goes away, leaving you at peace. You remember the analogy? If you're standing on the beach at the edge of the waters, if you were to, let's say, just keep looking at the moving waves coming towards you, you'll lose perspective. You might feel you're moving. You might even feel a little wobbly. But you stay rooted in your position, and then the wave leaves you, leaving you more firmly rooted there. Your feet would have sunk in a little, so to speak. Okay. Even so, this bhaktya tvananyaya labhyaha, through this aham sfarana vritti, which is also the same as the brahmakara vritti, by being rooted in that, in and through all the challenging situations in your life, aham ve evam vidho Arjuna, I am to be seen, to be known, and to be entered into in this way, O Arjuna, says the shloka. The second line now we will see in the shloka. So what happens by this holding on, if you like, if not holding on, the better idea would be by just allowing the aham svarana to happen in the wake of the instruction of the Guru. Because whenever you say holding on, there's again some effort. Okay? So here in aham svarana or brahmakara vritti, it is not a gross effort. It's more like the effort you make, let us say, when you choose to sleep, for example. So you might just switch off the light, prepare a comfortable bed, and just lie down, and then sleep occurs. You can't say, I am doing sleep. You can say, I am doing the process of eating, I'm doing the process of talking, and so on. But I never do this activity called sleep. Okay, I just facilitate it, and then it occurs. So this aham sparana / brahmakara vritti / which is the basis for nididhyasanam, is what is facilitated. It is facilitated by so many things. Even reading the words of Bhagavan facilitates it. Reading the Bhagavad Gita facilitates it. Or just be quiet if you already have a certain inner, understanding which stays with you. All you have to do is just refrain from all the conventional activities, and you will find the aham sparana arises. So even better than just stay with that. Just stay abiding as the self, as Bhagavan says. So what happens then, or what is the process that happens in this way? That is told in the second line of the shloka we'll look at now. Jnatum drashtum cha tattvena praveshtum cha parantapa. So jnatum is to know, drashtum, to better assimilate, to see very clearly, and praveshtum, to totally become one with. This would be the approximate meaning in English. If we look at what exactly it entails, jnatum, to know, everything looks similar, right? So the distinction made in the commentaries and acharyas give us this hint that when we hear the teaching of Atma Vichara or Advaita from our Guru, because of the pre-existing obstacles that are there in our mind, there is no easy or immediate assimilation of that vision of Advaita. Instead, we will just have the information. So an honest statement at that stage would be, okay, I have heard my Guru and he says that I am Brahman. Okay, an honest sadhaka would say that at the very initial stage. My Guru says that I am Brahman, or I am consciousness. I am not just living in the body. He has given me some hints, and these hints seem to make sense, but I only have some information along those lines. That stage in this particular shloka is known as jnatum. Just the bare minimum knowledge / information is with me about Atma Vichara. And then what happens, as I stay with the conviction, as I quieten my mind, I follow my Guru's holistic instructions about my conduct, and my mind becomes more mature. The next thing, drashtum, happens. Drashtum is to see. The very word seeing has a certain directness to it. That implies a very unmediated appreciation of the truth of Advaita. Unmediated means it's no longer just bound up in the words. It's no longer just a concept. It's no longer just information. So drashtum, to see the Atma in this particular case, is not see it as an object. See is used, of course, figuratively. Every word in English or Sanskritam will have some limitation when it is, teaching the self or the teaching self-knowledge. So seeing the Atma here means a direct appreciation of Atma as oneself without any mediation, such as a conceptual thinking. So that is when what I said, aham sphurana, comes into play, that the mind resolves in the self. That is drashtum here. And then finally, praveshtum cha parantapa. Parantapa is, scorcher of foes. He is addressing Arjuna. Praveshtum implies that aham sphurana has done its job. Okay, after perhaps a day, a year, perhaps several years, even several lives, who cares? The main point is you are with the instruction of the Guru and staying with that aham sphurana. By that drashtum and staying with that aham sphurana or brahmakara vritti, all the viparita bhavanas, the contrary notions which are making it seem very artificial, which make it seem like there's some effort involved in Atma Vichara. Really, there's no effort, as we saw. So all of those contrary notions leave us and make it spontaneous for us to abide in the Atma. That is known as praveshtum, to enter into. Enter into implies you no longer come back. You keep coming and going right now, so to speak, in dhyana or in your best moments in meditation, or could be while staying with the teaching of Bhagavan. You're able to see, yes, it rings true. What Bhagavan said appeals to me. It's 100% true. It's not just my concept. I see the truth of that. And then again, praveshtum, after a while, it becomes spontaneous. It's no longer something that comes and goes. You have entered into it completely. That is known as praveshtum, upon which jivan mukti, you're free even while liberated. That is the last step in this journey of Atma Vichara. So this is the entire journey summed up in these three words. Jnatum, the upadesha, the instruction of the Guru. You have at that point faith, no doubt. You have some strong conviction that the Guru is telling this with my welfare in mind. He is 100% true, and yet it is not something that I have owned up yet. It's not something that I have seen the truth directly. So the next step, like I said, aham sphurana. Sorry about that. And then the third step is praveshtum. Praveshtum implies that I have become spontaneously one with that. I'm no longer merely going in and out of any kind of subtle state, etc. So these three stages sum up the Atma Vichara. So we will see some of the other shlokas in the next session. For today, I'll just take a few more minutes to answer the question which came up earlier. I'll just read it out just for completeness. Can you give me the question? I have largely answered the question, but I'll just, recapitulate and sum it up for completeness. The question says, in jnana or brahmakara vritti, which is aham sphurana, the mind is resolved in the self. Does it mean that the knower and the known are one in that state? Not two equals Advaita. Is that true? That's the question. The first part I will answer. Yes, in jnana, in this particular case, we are using the word jnana as a vritti. Okay, so the word jnana is so contextual. Broadly, it will have these two contexts. One, that jnana is a tool to arrive at jivan mukti. Then you have to use the word jnana or understand that jnana refers to the brahmakara vritti or the aham sphurana. So there is still a certain process going on of the person, the devotee or the sadhaka. He is able to see that the mind resolves as the self, and yet again the contrary notions are there. So at that stage, the word jnana can still be used, but it is by way of courtesy. It's not the final meaning of the word jnana. It's not the last word of the subject, so to speak. So that is one use of the word jnana. And in other contexts, when we talk of the one who has jnana nishtha or one who has brahma jnana, jivan mukti, free while living, is totally free from any vestiges of vasanas or samskaras or any distress. Such a person is also having or is one with the jnana. At the same time, there is no real sadhana there. Okay. So the word jnana is used in the context of the final stage of sadhana. Also, the one who is siddha or one who has already completed the sadhana too, there such a person is one with the jnana itself. Okay, is no longer doing any more sadhana there. So to come back to your question, is jnana used as a brahmakara vritti in that context or aham sphurana? Correct. Those three you can use together. The mind is resolved in the self, also correct. Does it mean that the knower and the known are one in that state? Yes. So always the word state is fine. I prefer the state to just stick to the Sanskrit word vritti. Okay. So the knower and the known are one. Why? Because in that state, the dividing entity, which is the mind, is resolved. It's no longer there. But remember, the other way it doesn't work. Whenever the mind is resolved, doesn't mean aham sphurana is there. For example, in deep sleep. In deep sleep also the mind is resolved, but there is no aham sphurana. So in these two conditions, brahmakara vritti / aham sphurana, also deep sleep, the mind is resolved. However, in one it is in the wake of jnana. It is with sattva-guna as the pradhana. Plus, it is through the pramana, meaning the instruction of the guru is all there. You are alert to the instruction of the guru, which has made the mind resolve. So the way it resolves matters. The other one becomes just laya. The mind resolves, but more as a laya. Here in the jnana or brahmakara vritti, the mind resolves, but in the wake of the guru's upadesha, in the wake of seeing that the mind has no separate existence, then the mind resolves. So this is the, with jnana garbhita, we can say it is, with jnana it resolves, with the knowledge it resolves. So not two equals Advaita, yes. Advaita is not just a state, but yes, not two is the literal meaning of Advaita. So a is the negative particle, Dvaita is two or dual or the two-ness. Advaita is not two-ness. So that's the literal semantic, etymological meaning. Can also mean so many other things, but here it means the opposite of two, meaning just one, it's not two. The reason why we don't say one is because one can still mean that the two will come still later, okay? So just as we say that there was first, one tree, and then after that, so many seeds it gave out and there were many trees. So when you say there was just one, it implies the possibility of two coming up later. But when you say not two, it negates duality comprehensively. That's why the word Advaita, non-duality, is a better usage for what is being referred here than monism. Sometimes they use the word monism. It's okay, any word is okay as long as we know that the intention is to keep it as non-dual. Next question. I understand aham sfarana not as the final state, but an intermediate one. And if it is so, can we say that the brahmakara vritti is the tendency to go back to the self? Yeah, instead of using the word tendency, you can say that it is something that you are consciously facilitating to happen in order to come back to what is true. Okay. So if I am not too hung up on the semantics, I will say, yeah, what you said is fine. So, but it's not a tendency, because tendencies are passive. Okay, it's not a tendency which just happens, but you facilitate it. You actively facilitate that happening. That is the Atma Vichara which Bhagavan talks of. See, Bhagavan at a couple of places has distinguished or explained Atma Vichara as having these two stages. Maybe at some other day I will try to get you the exact quote, where initially you're sort of fighting a little bit with the mind. As the thoughts come out, as even soldiers emerging from a fort, you cut them down and come back. Who am I? So this is the first stage. After that, the mind has stopped, throwing up these thoughts and, distracting you and taking you away from yourself. Then the mind rests in the self, resolves as a self. That's stage 2, if you like, in Atma Vichara. And that is what is referred to here as the aham sfarana / brahmakara vritti, which is, yes, you can say it is a tendency or the sadhana to go back to the self. You can say that it is the sadhana to stay as the self, free from avidya. Okay, that is the idea, free from avidya. And the next question, is this the same as nididhyasana? Yes, primary first level answer, yes, this is the same as nididhyasana. The second level answer is this. The word nididhyasana predated Shankara Advaita, okay? So what has happened is that Shankara and others used the word in a slightly different way. They have actually used it the way Bhagavan uses it, where the mind resolves as the self, swatmani avasthanam, abiding as the self. It's not a doing involved. But since that word was there even before Adi Shankara and the great acharyas of Advaita came, so that word also has had some, you can say, continued existence. So what was the word nididhyasana in the other sense, the lower sense as it were, in the pre-Advaita sense? It meant that you have to meditate. I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. So you keep meditating like that. So that is different from resolving into the self in the wake of the pramana. So there is a slight difference there. Maybe another day I will talk about it in detail. So for those of you who are familiar with these nuances, there is a text called the Upadesha Sahasri, where nididhyasana is dismissed as mere repetition of a thought. So for example, I can say I am Brahman as the way you can look at a Shivalinga for many of people who worship in a temple, let us say. You look at a Shivalinga and then you superimpose Shivatvam, that this is the Lord Shiva himself. So you have all the reverence for Shiva in the form of an image, an anthropomorphic image or an altar. So there you superimpose a supreme being, Ishvara, the cosmic being, upon this little altar in front of you, right? That's very helpful for meditation. Even so, before Shankara and the Advaitins came in, Nididhyasana meant that you take this little fellow called the Jiva, the I am, which you and I are, and you superimpose Brahmatvam upon it, that I am Supreme Brahman, I am Supreme Brahman. So it's a kind of a positive thinking going on there. So that is a lower type of Nididhyasana, different from what Advaita says. Advaita says you don't have to do any positive thinking. You are already that. So it reveals to you that you are already that. But the lower meaning of the word Nididhyasana is a kind of pep talk, if you like. You are trying to superimpose that I am Brahman upon I. That kind of meditation also is called Nididhyasana, and it is available, or it was known even before Shankara to the Karma Kanda followers. You know, when we think of the Vedic ritualists, we tend to think they just want to go to Swarga, or they're just doing rituals. Not so. They were very accomplished in the practice of meditation. There is a text called the Brahma Siddhi where they talk of this type of Nididhyasana. Then Shankara and others took it to a different level, saying that Nididhyasana implies that in the wake of the Pramana, in the wake of the Guru Upadesha, in the wake of quietening the mind resolves into the source, the very cause of all that exists. That is the higher meaning of Nididhyasana. It is a jnana, it is a Pramana Vyapara. So that's a different thing which Bhagavan therefore highlights. Without bringing all these nuances, I just shared with you for those who have some interest in this kind of thing. So Bhagavan just cuts to the chase. He says, keep it simple. You don't have to superimpose I am Brahman, I am Brahman. And that type of Nididhyasana is not required. Instead, just stay as the self. Yeah. Yeah, so just abide as the self. That is the essence of Atma Vichara. So that is also Nididhyasana in Shankara's Advaita. So that's the same thing, okay? Just remember, as a kind of overarching, framework, what Adi Shankara has said and what Bhagavan said are just one-to-one the same. There's sometimes, a certain trying to draw distinctions, which is born of not fully getting into either one of their beautiful teaching. But otherwise, for one who's a practitioner, you will see that they're the same. Okay, the practitioner's point of view will be that they're identical. Response. Thank you so much. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Sure. So you're welcome. So we will stop here for today and chant the Akshara Manamalai. Now, would that be fine, Ji?
Absolute, sir. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Raghav.
Oh. Just end with the Shanti mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. So we will just start Akshara Manamalai. Please start chanting.
Arunachala Varakketra Akshara Manamalai Satra Karunakara Ganapadiye Karamaruli Kapaye Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Mena Ahame Ninai Pavarahatai Verarupar Arunachala Aழகு சுந்தரம் போலகமும் நீயுமுற்ற பின்னமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அகம் புகுந்தீர்த்து உன் அககுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆறு காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றிடில் அகிலம் கழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா கேப்பழித்த புனை ஏன் நினை பேத்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னையிற் பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா புனையே மாற்றி ஓடா அருள்பாய் அருணாச்சலா. ஊர் சோற்றுளம்பிடா துணை கண்டடங்கிட உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா. என்னை அழித்தே போ என்னை கலவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா. ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறரிழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா. ஐம்புல கழ்வர் அகத்தினிற் புகும்போதகத்தினி இலையோ அருணாச்சலா. ஒருவனா முன்னை ஒளித்தவர் வருவார் உன் சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா. ஓம்கார பொருளோ உயர்வில்லோய் உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா. ஔவை போல் எனக்கு உன் அருளை தந்தனை ஆளுவதுன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா. கண்ணுக்கு கண்ணாய் கண்ணின்றி காணுனை காணுவதெவர்பார் அருணாச்சலா. காந்தமிரும்பு போர் கவர்ந்தென்னை விடாமல் கலந்தென்னோடிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா. கிரி உருவாகிய கிருபை கடலே கிருபை கூர்ந்தருளுவாய் அருணாச்சலா. கீழ்மேலெங்கும் கிளரொளி மணியன் கீழ்மையை பாழ் செய் அருணாச்சலா. குற்றமுற்றரு தென்னை குணமாய் பணித்தாள் குரு உருவாயுளிர் அருணாச்சலா. கூர்வாட்கண்ணிய கொடுமையற் படாதருள் கூர்ந்தென்னை சேர்ந்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. கெஞ்சியும் வஞ்சியாய் கொஞ்சமும் இறங்கில்லை அஞ்சலென்றே அருள் அருணாச்சலா. கேளாதளிக்கும் முன் கேடில் புகழை கேடு செய்யாதருள் அருணாச்சலா. கையினிற் கனி உன் நீரசம் கொண்டு வகை வெறி கொள அருள் அருணாச்சலா. கொடியேட்டடியரை கொல்லுனை கட்டி கொண்டெங்கன் வாழ்வேன் அருணாச்சலா. கோபமில் குணத்தோய் குறியாய் என்னை கொள்ள குறையன் செய்தேன் அருணாச்சலா. கௌதமர் போற்றும் கருணை மாமலையே கடை கணி தாழ்வாய் அருணாச்சலா. சகலமும் விழுங்கும் கதிரொளி இனமன ஜல ஜமலத்தீடருணாச்சலா. காப்பாடுன்னை சாந்துணவாயான் சாந்தமாய் போவன் அருணாச்சலா. சித்தம் குளிரகதிர் ஹஸ்தம் வைத்தமுதவயை திற அருள்மதி அருணாச்சலா. சீரை அழித்து நிர்வாணமாய் செய்தருள் சீரை அழித்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. சுக கடல் பொங்க சொல்லுணர் வழங்க சும்மா பொருந்திடங்கருணாச்சலா. சோது செய்தென்னை சோதியாகினி உன் ஜோதி ஒரு காட்டருணாச்சலா. செப்படி வேத்தை கட்டிப்படி மயக்கு விட்டுருபடு வித்தை காட் அருணாச்சலா. சேராயனின் மெய் நீராய் உருகி கண்ணீராற்றழிவேன் அருணாச்சலா. கையென தள்ளிற் செய்வினை சுடுமலால் உய்வகையே துரை அருணாச்சலா. சொல்லாது சொல்லி நீ சொல்லரனில் என்று சும்மா இருந்தாய் அருணாச்சலா. சோம்பியாய் சும்மா சுகமுண்டுறங்கிடிற் சொல்வேரென் கதி அருணாச்சலா. சௌரியம் காட்டினை சழக்கற்றதென்றே கலியாதிருந்தாய் அருணாச்சலா. யமலியிற் கேடானான் உறுதிய நாடி நின்னுருவேன் அருணாச்சலா. ஞானமில்லாது உன் ஆசையார் தளர்வர ஞானம் தெரித்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. இமறு போல் நீயும் லர்ந்தில்லை என்றே நேர் நின்றனையன் அருணாச்சலா. தத்துவம் தெரியாத தனை ஊற்றாய் தத்துவம் இது என் அருணாச்சலா. தானே தானே தத்துவம் இதனை தானே காட்டுவாய் அருணாச்சலா. திரும்பிய அஹம்தனை தினமக கண்காண் தெரியும் என்றன என் அருணாச்சலா. தீரமில்லகத்தில் தேடி உந்தனையான் திரும்பவுற்றேன் அருள் அருணாச்சலா. பரிவில்லாயே பிறப்பெண் பயன் கொப்பிடவாயே அருணாச்சலா. தூய் மனமொழியற் தோயும் உன்னையகம் தோயவே அருளென் அருணாச்சலா. தெய்வமென்றுன்னை சாரவே என்னை சேர ஒழித்தாய் அருணாச்சலா. தேடாதோற்றனல் திரு அருளிதி அகத்திய கம் தீர்த்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. தைரியமோடு உன்னை அகநாடையான் தட்டழிந்தேன் அருள் அருணாச்சலா. தொட்டருட்கை மெய் கட்டிடாயனிய நஷ்டமாவேன் அருள் அருணாச்சலா. தோடமில் நீ அகத்தோடொன்றி என்று சொந்தோடம் ஒன்றிட அருள் அருணாச்சலா. நகைக்கிடமிலை நின் நாடிய என அருள் நகையிட்டு பார்நீ அருணாச்சலா. நானிலை நாடிட நானாய் ஒன்றி நீ காணுவாய் நின்றனை அருணாச்சலா. நின்னெறி எரித்தெனை நீராக்கிட முன் நின்னருள் மழை பொழி அருணாச்சலா. நீனானர புலி நிதங்களி மயமா நின்றிடு நிலையருள் அருணாச்சலா. நின்னுரு உனையான் விண்ணுரு நன்னிட என்னலையிருமென் அருணாச்சலா. மூலறிவறியா பேதையன் எந்தன் பாலறிவருத்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. நேக்கு நே குருகியான் புக்கிட உனை புகழ் நக்கனாய் நின்றனை அருணாச்சலா. நேசமில் எனக்கு உன் ஆசையை காட்டினி மோசம் செய்யாதருள் அருணாச்சலா. இதழி கனியால் நலனில்லை பதத்தில் நாடி உட்கொள் நலம் அருணாச்சலா. குந்திடதுந்தனை கந்தனை குண்டில்லை அந்த கண்ணி என கருணாச்சலா. நோக்கிய கருதிமை காக்கிய பக்குவமாக்கினி ஆண்டருள் அருணாச்சலா. பற்றிமால் விடந்தலை ஊற்றிரு முனமருள் பற்றிட அருள் புரி அருணாச்சலா. பார்த்தருள் மாலர பார்த்திலை எனில் அருள் பாருணக்கார் சொல்வர் அருணாச்சலா. பேத்து வெட்டுனை நேர்த்தித்தனாக்கினை அருள் பேத்தம் தெளி மருந்தருணாச்சலா. வீதியில் உனை சார் வீதியில் என்னை சேர் வீதி உந்தனக்கே அருணாச்சலா. புல்லறிவேதுரை நல்லறிவேதுரை புல்லிடவே அருள் அருணாச்சலா. பூமண மாமணம் பூரண மண பூரண மணமருள் அருணாச்சலா. பெயர் நினைத்திடவே பிடித்திழு தன்னை உன் பெருமையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா. பேய்தனம் விட விடா பேயா பிடித்தனை பேயனாக்கினையன் அருணாச்சலா. பைங்கொடியானான் பற்றின்றி வாடாமல் பற்று கொடாய்க்கா அருணாச்சலா. கொடியால் மயக்கியன் போதத்தை பறித்து உன் போதத்தை காட்டினை அருணாச்சலா. போக்கும் வரவுமில் பொது வெளியினில் அருள் போரா டங்காட்டருணாச்சலா. உதிகமாமுடல் பற்றற்று நாளும் முன் பவிசு கண்டுர அருள் அருணாச்சலா. மலை மருந்திட நீ மலைத்திடவோ அருண் மலை மருந்தார் ஒளிர் அருணாச்சலா. மானம் கொண்டுருபவர் மானத்தை அழி அபிமானமில்லாதொளிர் அருணாச்சலா. நெஞ்செடர் கெஞ்சிடும் கொஞ்ச அறிவனியான் வஞ்சியார் தருளென்னை அருணாச்சலா. நீ காமனில்லாமல் மாகாத்தலை கலம் ஆகாமல் காத்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. முடியடி காணா முடிவிட தனை நேர் முடிவிட கடனில்லை அருணாச்சலா. மூக்கிலன் முன்காட்டு முகுரமகாதென்னை தூக்கி அணைந்தருள் அருணாச்சலா. மெய்யகத்தின் மனமென் மலரணையில் நாம் மெய் கலந்திட அருள் அருணாச்சலா. மேன்மேல் தாழ்ந்திடும் மெல்லியர் சேர்ந்து நீ மேன்மையுற்றனையன் அருணாச்சலா. மைமய நீ தருண்மையினால் உனது உன்னை வசமாக்கினை அருணாச்சலா. மொட்டையடே தென்னை வெட்ட வெளியில் நீ கட்டமாடினையன் அருணாச்சலா. மோகம் தவிர்த்து உன் மோகம் அவைத்துமென் மோகம் தீரார் என் அருணாச்சலா. மௌனியாய் கல் போல் மலராதிருந்தால் மௌனமிதாமோ அருணாச்சலா. எவனென் வாயில் மண்ணினை அட்டி என் பிழை பொழித்த கருணாச்சலா. யாரும் அறியாதென் மதியினை மருட்டியவர் கொலை கொண்ட கருணாச்சலா. ரமணன் என்றுரைத்தேன் ரோஷம் கொள்ளாதென்னை தமித்திட செய்யவா அருணாச்சலா. பகலில்லா வெறுவெளி வீட்டில் ரமித்திடுவோம் வா அருணாச்சலா. லட்சியம் வைத்தருள் ஹஸ்திரம் வீட்டென்னை பக்ஷித்தாய் பிராணனோடு அருணாச்சலா. லாபனி இக பர லாபமில் என்னை உற்று லாபமென்னூற்றனை அருணாச்சலா. வரும்படி சொல்லில்லை வந்தென் படியள வருந்திடும் தலை விதி அருணாச்சலா. பாவென்றாம் புக்குன் வாழ்வருளன்றே என் வாழ்விழந்தேன் அருணாச்சலா. வேட்டிடர் கஷ்டமாம் விட்டிடாதுனை உயிர் வேட்டிட அருள் புரி அருணாச்சலா. வீடு விட்டீர் துள வீடு புக்கு பையமுன் வீடு காட்டினை அருணாச்சலா. வெளிவிட்டேன் உன் செயல் வெறுத்திடாதுன் அருள் வெளிவேட்டனை கா அருணாச்சலா. வேதாந்தத்தே வேரற விளங்கும் வேத பொருளருள் அருணாச்சலா. வைதலை வாழ்த்தா வைத்தருட்குடியா வைத்தென்னை விடாதருள் அருணாச்சலா. அம்புவில் ஆலி போல் அன்புரு உனிலெனை அன்பா கரை தருள் அருணா அருணாச்சலா கருணை என்றெண்டையான் அருட்கண்ணில் பட்டேன் உன் அருள்வல்லை தப்புமோ அருணாச்சலா செந்தே தருட்பட சிலந்தி போல் காட்டி சிறையே தொண்டனை அருணாச்சலா அன்போடு நாமங்கேள் அன்பர்தம் அன்பர் கண்பனாயிட அருள் அருணாச்சலா என்போலும் தீனரை இன்புற காத்து நீ என்னாலும் வாழ்ந்தருள் அருணாச்சலா என்புருகன்பர்தம் இன் சொற்கொள் செவியுமென் பொன்மொழி கொள அருள் அருணாச்சலா பொறுமயம் பூதர புன் சொல்லை நன் சொல்ல பொறுத்தருள் இஷ்டம் பின் அருணாச்சலா மாலை அழி தருணாச்சல ரமணையின் மாலை அணிந்தருள் அருணாச்சலா மாலை அழி தருணாச்சல ரமணையின் மாலை அணிந்தருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமண மாலை வாழி.
Raghavji,
Namaste,
very
Jiya. Please take over. Thank you.
many thanks for a wonderful session, and madam, thank you once again for a beautiful rendition of Akshar Manamalai. Very grateful. Thank you. Rajesh ji,
ओके सर, ओके
Aarti.
ओके।
सदा वसन्तं हृदयारविन्दे भवानी सहितं नमामि। त्वमेव माता च पिता त्वमेव बन्धुश्च सखा त्वमेव विद्या द्रविणः त्वमेव सर्वं मम देव बार बार विनती करूं धर्म चरण में शीश भक्ति ज्ञान मोह दीजिए कृपा सिंधु जगदीश नाना सुगंध पुष्पाणि यथा कालो भवान च पुष्पांजलि मया दत्त गृहाण श्री रमणाय नमो नमः प्राशहस्राणि क्रियन्ते हरिसमया पूजा वैशानामि क्षमितां परमेश्वरः आवाहन जानामि विसर्जनम पूजा से जानामि क्षम्यतां महर्षि ऋषि नमो नमः आराध्य समर्पते नमः
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Raghavji. We shall reconvene and meet next Sunday to continue the 42 select verses of Bhagavan Raman Maharishi with Raghavji. Namo Ramana.